In this video, I'm going to show you a really easy way to find out if your rental property is working on a net profit and whether it's putting money in your pocket. I'm also going to share with you a free template that I'm going to put a link for in the description. So let's get to it. I've created this template for my Airbnb property to calculate whether it's working on a net profit, whether it's covering all of its costs. So I'm giving you a real life example over here because the values on the spreadsheet are from my Airbnb property and all the costs are actual costs I've incurred while running it as a business. So I've split the months through the year according to the information I had. It starts from April to April, which is usually the financial year. So in the UK, the financial year starts from 6th of April one year and then rolls over to the other year until the 5th of April. So in my case, I just bought the flat in July and it started working since then. That's why I have the column starting at July. The rent income I've pretty much extracted from my Airbnb payments, and you can see the really strong months and really slow months. The second row is utility bills, and for most of you that live in the UK, you may well know that electricity is pretty expensive in comparison to water supply and sewage, which I've opted out from the spreadsheet. Electricity, you can see it's pretty expensive in some months like December and January and Feb. And also here at the bottom, I've left a note for myself saying electricity goes 1 month behind. A bill issued on 5th of February is from 5th of Jan until 5th of February, so expenses go against January. And that's worth mentioning because, for example, here, probably I would have gotten my cost for July's electricity in August. So when you get your utility bill, make sure to reflect on the spreadsheet the period it covers and not get confused with the period you've received it on. With regards to electricity cost, I was actually really keen to understand how much it cost me to have a guest over. So I've created a separate sheet, which is occupancy rate. Over here, I've recorded the percentage each month where my flat was occupied. So I have the number of nights, for example, July 16. 16 is not 89% out of the entire month. It's 89% out of the number of nights that I had available on the app. So for example, I block out 2 days before and after each booking so the cleaner can go and prepare the place. And that way you lose availability each month. And that's how I've calculated 89% occupancy rate and 16 nights. And with all the data with the percentages of the occupancy rate and the nights booked each month, I've used the opportunity to calculate some extra statistics, which is an average occupancy rate and an average nights per month booked, which is pretty nice to have. So if you want to see how well you're doing with your availability. Having said that, occupancy rate is used in the electricity per night, going back to what I said that I want to calculate how much guests are using as electricity costs. Going to the electricity per night sheet, you can see I have the number of nights. And if you click on the cell, you can see the value is taken from the occupancy rate sheet. And then I've put in the value for the electricity cost for that month. So the total July bill was £82.50. And then I calculate the electricity per night, how much it cost me, by dividing the total value of the electricity cost by the number of nights that it was occupied. So I get £5. And that way you can see that in the hottest month, for example, the electricity bill really went down because there were 18 nights booked, but the electricity bill was only £13.70, which is really nothing compared with other months, for example, in winter. When in December we had 10 nights booked, and obviously they pumped up the heating really, and we've got £342 of electricity bill, which is £34 cost of energy each night. And also I've calculated an average electricity during October and February. And I've grouped them together from October to February because the temperatures are dropping and guests are really using electricity more because of heating. And you can see that the average electricity during winter is 5 times more expensive than during summer. And this is understandable. And this is just a simple sheet that can help you understand your energy bills with regards to the nights booked. So if you're renting out your property on a long-term tenancy agreement and you don't have a cleaner to pay, then you probably don't need this role. In my case, I have a cleaner for the Airbnb. I've just recorded how much it cost me each month. Next one is broadband, and this is a crucial service for short-term holiday lets because it's pretty much, internet for your guests, which you will need if you want to have any bookings at all. Then I've put a row that you can use for some extra expenses, like if you want to record any towels, sheets, coffees, or anything, any consumable or perishable you've bought for your holiday let. If you want to see a comprehensive template with all the expenses for your self-assessment tax return for a rental property, you can check out another video, which I'm going to link over here for you, or leave a link in the description. Now after the rent and all of the expenses, I take out the expenses from the rent and I record that as gross Airbnb profit. So in this case, you can see it's this. So it's rent income minus the expenses. So from the gross Airbnb profit, which is considered taxable income. So taxable income in accounting is your revenue less all of the expenses. So that taxable income is taxed 20% on. So this way, 20% after taken out of the gross Airbnb, I calculate the net profit. So in July, I've made £368 after paying tax. And this value can actually be a negative one. So for example, in November, we didn't really have a lot of nights booked, but they did use a lot of electricity. That equates to a negative value, which in theory, you shouldn't be paying tax when you're at a loss, but tax is calculated on a financial year basis. Whereas here, I'm calculating it on a monthly basis, so I do need to record it even if it's a negative value. And what the after-tax net row tells me is pretty much which months are really worth it for the business. So for example, if I were to draw any conclusions, I could easily say that November, even a bit of December is not really worth, because I'm either working at a loss or I'm working at a really low profit, which is really sometimes not worth the hassle. The other reason I've calculated the net profit, so that's taking tax out of the gross profit, is for me to check if the property can cover some of its other expenses. So for example, over here below, you can see I have mortgage, after mortgage, service charges and ground rent, and after service charges and ground rent. So in this row, I pretty much sum up what we have in the rows above. So the annual gross income is 5,500, whereas the annual tax, so that's 20% out of this, should be 1,100. After paying tax, I should be in theory left with £4,452. At the time of the spreadsheet was recorded, my mortgage monthly payment was £284. Now I try to deduct that out of the net profit for each month and see if the rental property can actually take care of its own financial cost. So a finance cost is the cost of having debt. In other words, I'm trying to find out whether the property being rented out can take care of the mortgage and pay itself. So in this case, I am at a profit even after the mortgage is paid. However, in other months where the business was slow, we can see that when the net profit was negative, even after paying mortgage, well, that's more negative. However, in December, for example, after paying tax on the small profits, we have a small net profit of £80, which is unable to pay the entire mortgage payment. However, it does take out a considerable chunk out of it. Another interesting month is March, where we're left with a net profit of 295, which barely covers the mortgage, which is still awesome because you have a property that's paying itself and you're going to be left with equity after some time. And this is why I like the after mortgage row. So it pretty much tells you in general, by looking at the color coding I've inserted in the spreadsheet, how well you're doing. So we have really strong green over here, a really strong red over here, another green over here, another green over here. So we have predominantly green over here, which in general tells you that renting out the property is taking care of itself. And the final two rows is testing whether all of those profits can also take care of service charges and ground rent. Now, this property that I'm renting out on Airbnb is a flat, which is a leasehold property inside a larger building with other flats. This larger building actually has a separate owner and has a managing agency. So I do need to pay service charge to the managing agency that's taking care of the building. And I also need to pay ground rent for the owner of the land that the building sits on. So I've recorded on average how much all service charges plus the ground rent on an annual basis divided by 12 months, because we're calculating on a monthly basis here, how much that costs on average, which is £117. And then I'm trying to deduct that from the value that we have after we've paid the mortgage. So over here we have a negative, strong positive, strong positive, strong negatives. What this tells you is that pretty much in July, my property was at a plus. It paid the mortgage for itself, but then it helped me pay for the service charges and for the ground rent. But then I also had to pay £23 off of my pocket, which is still not bad because you have a property that's paying for itself plus the service charges, ground rent and the mortgage, and you just have to pay £20. August and September were pretty good, as well as October, meaning that the property made a lot of revenue, paid the tax, paid the mortgage, and paid the service charge and the ground rent, and even left money in your bank account at a surplus, which is amazing. However, that money that that was left in the account as a plus will probably go to cover the bad months, which are November and December. November and December were not really strong, so they couldn't take care of the mortgage, they couldn't take care of service charge and ground rent, so you need to kind of compensate for that with money you've saved up beforehand. So you can see all of that money, it's going on the slow months. January is kind of just barely taking care of itself, which is still nice. So I'm taking £50 net and probably spending it on takeaway. Don't do that, bad idea. Overall, we have an annual net income after tax, mortgage, service charge, ground rent. So SCGR is service charge, ground rent, just an abbreviation. On an annual basis, we have £433. And that's not really what you put in your pocket in a real accounting terms. That's just in according with this spreadsheet, which is just trying to figure out whether the property being rented out can take care of all of its expenses. When you're actually doing your real life self-assessment tax return, you should not be using these values as expenses. For example, the mortgage, service charge, ground rent, all of those values cannot be wholly used as an expense for you using the rental property as a business. Putting costs as a business expense to your rental property is not something that's allowed for all of the costs. So for example, this spreadsheet is only helpful for you to find out if your property can take care of its expenses. Whereas if you need a spreadsheet that's more suitable to preparing your self-assessment tax return, then again, I recommend you checking out the link below. And that's pretty much it. I hope this real life example was helpful for you to kind of understand how the template works. I'm going to leave this template for you to download for free in the description again. If you found this video helpful, then drop a like so it can spread to more people. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future videos. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Goodbye.